tonight on First at 9, this Sunday the 6th of October 2024. Swift justice. President assures to expedite investigations into the Easter Sunday attacks. Vows to take measures to prevent such a tragedy in future. En route, Inland Revenue Department collects over 70% of target tax revenue for 2024 by the end of September. Displeased. Around 250,000 teachers and principals of the country work under unsatisfactory conditions, asserts the Prime Minister. Pledges to improve teachers' standard of living. Impending threat. Failing to nominate suitable candidates will see the end of traditional political parties. Warn election watchdogs.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දෙනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
වැඩිම මනාපෙන් ජනතා තේරීම මෙවරත්
සුදේශී ඔරිජිනල් කුහුඹම තමයි.
This is Derana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to Sri Lanka's premier primetime English news bulletin, Derana First at 9. I'm Tarindu Mahendra, joining you live with the latest in Sri Lanka and from around the world. Now, Sri Lanka celebrated World Teachers' Day today with commemoratory events organised across the island. In her Teachers' Day message, Prime Minister Dr. Harini Amarasuri asserted that some 250,000 teachers and principals of Sri Lanka have been working under unsatisfactory conditions while performing their duties. As such, the Prime Minister pledged to create a favourable environment capable of producing teaching professionals rich in knowledge, positive attitude and skill, while also focusing on raising teachers' standard of living.
The World Teachers' Day is celebrated annually on the 5th of August. This year's World Teachers' Day celebration was held under the theme Valuing Teacher Voices towards a New Social Contract for Education. According to UNESCO, this year's theme underscores the urgency of calling for and attending to teachers' voices to address their challenges and to also acknowledge and benefit from the expert knowledge and input that they bring to education. In Sri Lanka, Teachers' Day is celebrated on the 6th of October. Accordingly, numerous events were organised today in commemoration of Teachers' Day. Meanwhile, in her message for World Teachers' Day 2024, Prime Minister Dr. Harini Amarasuri noted that nearly 250,000 teachers and principals in Sri Lanka worked under unsatisfactory conditions while performing their duties. She further noted that teachers and principals have been severely affected due to the pressure of education and lack of wages. In her message, Prime Minister Amarasuri asserted that the number of individuals leaving the teaching profession has increased, while the number of newcomers entering the teaching service has drastically decreased. Taking this situation into account, Prime Minister Dr. Harini Amarasuri pledged to build an education system and produce teaching professionals rich in knowledge, positive attitude and skill, while also focusing on raising the standard of living of teachers.
Horizon Campus 2024 Intake 2. Register now. චන්දරු සුබේ කාගෙත් මන අපේ සිංහ TV සඳහා සුපිරි deal.
Welcome to Cinnamon Life, South Asia's biggest entertainment hub, where awe awaits.
President Anura Kumara Dissanayake assured to expedite the investigations into the Easter Sunday terror attacks and pledged that steps will be taken to ensure that such a tragedy never occurs in the country again. While engaging in a discussion with the families of the Easter attacks victims at St. Sebastian's Church in Katuapitiya, the head of state emphasized that investigations into the attack launched by his government will be fair and transparent, and that the perpetrators of the attacks would be punished regardless of their position.
President Anura Kumara Dissanayake visited St. Sebastian's Church in Katuapitiya, Negombo this morning and paid tribute to the memorial established in honour of the victims of the Easter Sunday terror attacks.
දේවස්ථානය තමයි
116 people were killed in this church due to the Easter Sunday bombings. We asked the previous government to launch a fair and transparent investigation into the matter, as we need to uncover the complete truth behind this attack. Who aided this attack? Who funded the explosives to carry out the attack? However, none of this was uncovered. Although we continuously requested that these matters be investigated, none of the leaders honoured our requests. At the end, we were left without answers. However, we believe that you will uncover the truth and provide answers to us.
ඔබතුමා ගැන විශ්වාසය තැබුවේ.
අපි එවැනි ඛේදවාචකයක් කිසිසේත්
We will not let this strategy be buried with time. I have already instructed the Secretary to the Ministry of Public Security to launch a fair and transparent investigation into the matter. There is a widespread belief in society that the Easter Sunday attacks may have been carried out for political gain. This has to be clarified, and the people should be aware of the truth. If those who are deployed to ensure the country's national security are also involved in the Easter attacks, it poses a threat to the country. I assure you that plans are already in place to expedite the investigations into the Easter Sunday terror attacks.
අපේ පරීක්ෂණ දියත් කිරීම සඳහා කටයුතු කරලා තිබෙනවා.
The President also met with the families of the Easter attack victims, who shared their concerns and difficulties directly to the head of state.
මෙතෙක් කරලා තියෙන පරීක්ෂණ වලින් එළිවෙලා තියෙනවා ආරක්ෂක අංශ සහ බුද්ධි අංශවල තියෙන සම්බන්ධය. වවුනදීව පොලිස් නිලධාරීන් දෙදෙනා ඝාතනය කරපු තැන ඉඳලා දෙහිවල බෝම්බේ පුබරගත්තු ඒ ත්‍රස්තවාදියා අන්තිමට සම්බන්ධ වෙච්ච ආරක්ෂක අංශ සමාජිකයා දක්වා බොහෝ පිරිසක් ඉන්නවා. ඒ අතරින් බොහෝ අය තාම සක්‍රීය සේවයේ ඉන්නවා. ඔබතුමා හිතනවාද ඒගොල්ලෝ සක්‍රීය සේවයේ ඉන්නකොට අපිට සාධාරණයක් බලාපොරොත්තු වෙන්න පුළුවන් කියලා?
අපි කිසිවෙක් පූර්ව වශයෙන්
We will not initiate investigations with any preconceived conclusions or biases. We will never be able to reveal the truth if we have already arrived at a prior conclusion. However, with the ongoing investigations, if those involved in the Easter Sunday attacks are revealed, we will ensure that they will lose their positions.
අපි කිසිසේත්ම පැකිලෙන්නේ නැහැ.
මම මේ පාර ඔබතුමාට ඡන්දය දුන්නා.
I voted for you this time. However, I don't trust any politician, because all of you might have been aware of this attack. We are the only ones who did not know anything in this regard. No one can bring back my family members who were killed. I request the politicians to serve us justice without any of these political performances. I wouldn't have come here if I knew that you were coming, because I'm fed up with the lies of politicians. However, I request that you enact a law that ensures public safety and that such a tragedy will never occur in this country again.
නීතියක් හදන්න කියලා තමයි ඔබතුමාගෙන් ඉල්ලන්නේ.
කවුරුත් දැනගෙන හිටිය කෙනෙක් වැරදි.
Not everyone was aware of this attack. The VIP security forces had been informed in this regard. However, none of our party members, including myself, had VIP security. Justice is that we ensure that those involved in committing this massacre be punished before the law and ensure that such a tragedy will never occur in the country again. We are taking over a country that has already reached an agreement with the IMF. This economic program presented by the IMF will be in place for the next 3 years. They have given us several goals to achieve within this time period. It is essential that we meet their demands. Discussions are also in place to provide the public with relief packages in future.
ජනතාවට සහන දීම සඳහා අවශ්‍ය පැකේජය අපි ඉදිරිපත් කරන්න බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා.
The Inland Revenue Department has collected more than 70% of the target tax revenue for 2024 by the end of September. According to data from the Inland Revenue Department, 1.4 trillion rupees in taxes have been collected as of the 30th of September this year. Meanwhile, the Commissioner General of the IRD, Sepalika Chandrasekhara, noted that the department has identified a significant number of self-assessed taxpayers who have not yet submitted their taxes. In response, she stated that department officials will reach out to the relevant taxpayers and commence collection efforts starting tomorrow. Meanwhile, the Swedish government expressed interest in supporting the development of Sri Lanka's renewable energy sector. While focusing on the developments of Sri Lanka's renewable energy sector, the Swedish government also expressed willingness to increase educational opportunities and mitigate visa difficulties for Sri Lankan students in Sweden. The Swedish government is also planning to focus on the food security of Sri Lanka and the nutritional challenges that exist among school children. These opinions were expressed during a discussion held between the Prime Minister, Dr. Harini Amarasuriya, and the Swedish Ambassador to Sri Lanka at the Prime Minister's office recently. Now, Acting Inspector General of Police Priyantha Veerasurya has issued a directive to all police stations emphasizing the need to address pending minor complaints lodged by the public. Police stations are required to conduct thorough inquiries into these outstanding complaints and take the necessary actions within the next 2 weeks.
Sri Lanka decides 2024.
Executive Director of the People's Action for Free and Fair Elections, Rohan Hettiarachchi, is of the view that the result of the recent presidential election is a reflection of the Sri Lankan people's disappointment in the traditional political regime that prevailed within the country. Addressing a media briefing convened by the March 12 movement, the PAFREL Executive Director emphasized that the upcoming general election will be a decisive test for Sri Lanka's traditional political parties, as the people will not hesitate to deny them power if the parties fail to nominate suitable candidates for the election.
Those who are versed in this country's election history know how violent it used to be. It was usual for 30 to 40 deaths to be reported during an election. Before the year 2000, firearms were in use during every election and offices were set ablaze. However, due to the intervention of civil society and election observers and the collective efforts of political parties, the Election Commission and the media, the present election culture of this country is comparable to that of a European country. If we put aside the misuse of government powers and property, issues such as election violence and the use of posters and cutouts have been reduced to the levels seen in European countries. This is the result of a continuous struggle. During the recent presidential election, the people of this country gave a clear message to the traditional corrupt political regime. Taking into account the result of the last election, we can clearly say that if political parties nominate the same old traditional groups for this election, those political movements will be completely eliminated from society. Therefore, at this juncture, it is imperative for political parties to be extremely diligent when awarding nominations. If not, those parties and their leaders will become a part of Sri Lankan political history. During the presidential election, the people made clear what the country's demand was. As such, the people will take appropriate decisions if political parties fail to nominate the correct groups. Therefore, the impending general election is a decisive one for political parties. This election will decide whether these parties remain on the Sri Lankan political landscape or not.
Now, the People's Struggle Alliance claimed that President Anurukumara Dissanayake has also pledged to support and continue Sri Lanka's agreement with the International Monetary Fund despite his vocal opposition to the agreement prior to his election to office. Meanwhile, former MP Nimal Lanza is of the view that despite the apparent deviation from the NPP's manifesto, the government should be allowed to continue with the IMF program, as according to Lanza, it is in the best interest of the country. With that, here's a look at more thoughts shared in the political arena.
Let's help those who claim that the funds stolen by the Rajapaksa family is in Uganda. Let's help them bring the funds back to Sri Lanka. The existing debt crisis will also come to an end if those funds are returned to the country. Some claim that there is a total of $18 billion. I will definitely assist the government to recover the funds.
I recently saw that the government has arrested the chairman appointed by the government of good governance who was accused of misconducting regarding insurance and the importation of vehicle spare parts. However, instead of sending him to jail, he is back in his office at the transport board. This is not the correct method of apprehending thieves. We will support the government if they are doing this in the proper manner. Committees were appointed to apprehend thieves during the government of good governance. The chief of staff of the current government was also a member of those committees. Therefore, the current chief of staff will definitely have the relevant documentations in his possession. Therefore, I request the government to fulfill their duties without putting on unnecessary performances.
We will not use our political power unreasonably just because our government is ruling at the moment. This government will definitely punish the corrupt legally.
The NPP lied prior to the presidential poll. They have never spoken or voted in favor of the agreement with the IMF during a parliamentary session. However, these people who completely opposed the IMF agreement previously are continuing with it. As a country, we are in fact pleased about their decision. Although they opposed these agreements in the past, in reality it is not possible to do. The benefit of Ranil Wickremesinghe's economic plan will only last for another 6 to 7 months. By next March, the government will have to provide solutions to the people through their own programs.
Following the conclusion of the talks held between the IMF and the President, the IMF and the Ministry of Finance released a statement that clearly reflected that both parties have reached an agreement. Accordingly, both parties have agreed to continue the agreement that former President Ranil Wickremesinghe signed with international sovereign bondholders. What is the economic plan of former President Ranil Wickremesinghe? Under his plan, the people are obligated to pay a higher interest. We have obtained loans in accordance with US law. However, at the end of both Ranil and Anura's discussions with the IMF, they have decided to service the debt according to British law. In that case, we are bound to settle the debt. If not, court cases would be filed, making it much more difficult for the country to move forward. How did they arrive at such a decision? The final agreement they have reached with the IMF completely contradicts their election manifesto and what they said during their rallies prior to the presidential poll.
Sri Lanka decides 2024.
Now, the Indian High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, Santosh Jha, stated that India is increasingly embracing the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, noting that the country's recent global initiatives are inspired by these principles. He made these remarks during the Mahatma Gandhi Oration organized by the Indian High Commission in Sri Lanka and the Sri Lanka India Society. He also invited the Sri Lankan diaspora to contribute their perspectives towards shaping a brighter future for the country, emphasizing that only by separating from the country can one clearly identify its issues. Meanwhile, the Mahatma Gandhi Oration, which was delivered by former Sri Lankan High Commissioner to India, Austin Fernando, he remarked that India's commitment to honouring its promise to its late Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw to avoid political interference in the military serves as a significant example for all democratic heads of state.
A Mahatma Gandhi oration was held recently at the Swami Vivekananda Cultural Centre in Colombo. The event was organised by the cultural arm of the High Commission of India in Sri Lanka and the Sri Lanka Indian Society.
The ideal of Mahatma was a man belonging to the roots. I think in India today there is more awareness than ever before since independence that we must be rooted to our traditions, our culture, that we do not need to approach, let's say, the British Empire in a tie and a suit. You could be in just a dhoti and with one lathi, you can walk up to the British Emperor and talk to him as an equal. Another example of how today, when our Prime Minister has launched a global campaign called LIFE, which is the lifestyle for environment, it is actually Mahatma Gandhi who first said, that there is enough for everybody's need here on earth, but not enough for your greed. And the idea that, particularly in the West, that you could live with 10 times or 15 times consumption levels of countries in South Asia or other parts of Asia, and then put the onus on this part of the world to actually deal with climate change and not take the responsibility and say sorry to the world, actually. I mean, I'm not asking you for money. We will generate the money, as we are doing in India, and we are doing better than most parts of the world today, thanks to the fact that we are wedded to the ideals of Mahatma Gandhi. I think we are now beginning to imbibe those values in India very, very significantly. He has gradually, in many ways, allowed us to escape the time that we were not free, and in ways that we had not understood being free is. We have evolved as a country, but many things that we're doing today. I mean, today, for example, I don't know how many of you know that Mahatma Gandhi was the first to write on sanitation in India, because he made the point that only a non-resident Indian can see that. The moment you have the distance from India, when you look at India from outside, that you begin to see things that are not normal or right about your own country. Because when you live there, you absorb it on a day-to-day basis. It's a lesson for many Sri Lankans. It would be good to go out and see Sri Lanka and see what can be done better here.
Veteran civil servant and former Sri Lankan High Commissioner to India, Austin Fernando, delivered the Mahatma Gandhi Oration.
He had so much of values in him: the non-violence, freedom, equality, protest, democracy. We in Sri Lanka and India have just completed 2 democratic elections successfully to elect our political leaders. In the subcontinent, there had been political turmoil in the recent past, the last 2-3 years, challenging democratic tradition and doctrine. Hence, the relevance of democracy is more. On that, I need not go into details of the dethroning of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa 2.5 years after being elected, the departure of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to be a political refugee, then the Prime Minister Imran Khan being imprisoned, probably awaiting appointment as the Chancellor of the Oxford University, where he had been alumnus. I think a respectable way out of his problems here in Pakistan. And if you see the punishments meted out to Madam Aung San Suu Kyi under undemocratic military interventions, all these are related to democracy. When compared to the above mentioned and even previous military experiences in Bangladesh, Pakistan and Myanmar, we in Sri Lanka and India are blessed with a special democratic aspect, that is not facing a military coup to oust an elected government. There had been a coup threat in Sri Lanka in the 60s. The one was considered a serious one, other one was considered a joke at that time. But anyway, there were 2, but we call it one. The only case I knew of India was about PM Indira Gandhi suspecting such and checking it with Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw. He said, I had no intention of even a thought of getting involved in politics or taking over, as long as I command my army without any interference. That's the most important thing. Politicians from Prime Minister Nehru to Prime Minister Modi have respected the conditionalities that no interference, which I consider a grand lesson to all democratic heads of state.
Fast track your career from O-levels with eSoft. Crunchy goodness for hunger on the go.
Welcome back. Now, the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce says an International Monetary Fund and Official Creditor Committee clearance for an in-principle deal with private bondholders will pave the way for fiscal stability. Releasing a statement, the Chamber said the completion of the OCC and IMF consultation processes is a positive indicator for ensuring successful future reviews and disbursements under the IMF's extended fund facility arrangement. It also said that the steadfast commitment to aligning with the comparability of treatment principle has been crucial in advancing Sri Lanka's broader economic reform agenda. The Chamber of Commerce added that it looks forward to the completion of the restructuring of Sri Lanka's external debt. Now, the government has increased the special import levy imposed on potatoes and Bombay onions as part of its program of protecting local farmers. Accordingly, the levy on a kilogram of imported potatoes has been increased up to 60 rupees, while the levy on a kilogram of Bombay onions has been increased up to 30 rupees.
President Anurukumar Dissanayake has made the decision to increase the relevant tax under the powers vested in him by Section 2 of the Special Commodity Levy Act No. 48 of 2007. Accordingly, the special import tax imposed on potatoes has been increased by 10 rupees from 50 rupees per kilogram to 60 rupees. Meanwhile, the special import tax imposed on Bombay onions has been increased by 20 rupees from 10 rupees per kilogram to 30 rupees.
And with that, here's a look at some corporate news in brief.
CFA Society Sri Lanka announced the launch of CFA Institute Research Challenge Sri Lanka 2024-2025, the local round of the competition at the Colombo Stock Exchange recently. The research challenge is aimed at promoting best practices in equity research and fostering ethical standards among university students worldwide through hands-on mentoring and intensive training. This competition will provide a unique platform for students to demonstrate their expertise and commitment to excellence in equity research. Meanwhile, SDD Polymer Private Limited, a distributor and supplier of plastic raw materials in Sri Lanka, recently celebrated its 20th anniversary. The anniversary celebration held in Colombo paid tribute to the suppliers and customers that facilitated the company's journey.
And with that, we wrap up tonight's edition of First at 9. Thank you for joining and have a good night.